Welcome to another episode of the Wealth Alchemist. Today we're going to be discussing legacies and the various pieces that factor into that, whether it be financial or values driven. There's a lot of different considerations, and we believe it's a lot more than just financial. I've got Shane Keith with me here today to talk through some of the points we want to discuss.
Looking forward to it, Dylan.
So the first piece is legacy is more than just the money that you're leaving behind. You're leaving an impact, values, assets, beliefs, behaviors, memories over your lifetime. And another piece is you could potentially leave behind a lot of clarity or a lot of confusion for your heirs.
100%. We come across this all the time where ex-client comes in and, hey, I don't have an estate plan. I need to get an estate plan, and immediately start talking about the documentation necessary, which again, rightfully so, trust, will, power of attorneys, all very vital to a strong estate plan. Again, an overarching theme of an estate plan is it should be effective and efficient in what you're trying to solve. And ultimately, trying to settle out the estate, those are the two main key pieces, is effectiveness and efficiency. Is it going to the right people, and is it doing it at an efficient manner? Those are what the documents help do. But a piece that is almost always missed is when we get into the discussion of what do you want to make sure your heirs are aware of, or the value behind what you're leaving them. When you take a step back and you look at it statistically from a national perspective, 90% of inheritances are spent like gambling winnings within 2 years. So if there's no plan, just know that they're doing all the things that you wish you would have done at that point in time. But on a more serious note, that's why here at KDI we do legacy planning meetings, and those come in all different shapes and sizes in regards to how we conduct those meetings. But when we get the kids or the grandkids in a room and share either at a high level, these are the wishes and desires of your parents or your grandparents. This was the intention behind it. This was the purpose. These are the important things to consider. This is why it's structured the way it is. It brings an immense amount of clarity to a family estate plan.
And there's a lot that plays into it, more than just the size of the inheritance. Whether your inheritance is just a few $1,000s, or you're going to be leaving hundreds of millions behind, businesses, assets, properties, all sorts of different things, the size of it isn't necessarily the most important piece. Why do you think preparing those heirs and your kids and the beneficiaries is more important than how or what they're going to be receiving?
Especially in the business we're in, Dylan, we get to see it all the time. I think the key piece that gets missed in the estate plans is intention and purpose. That what is the intention and purpose of what's being left behind? What was the value or the driving factor that had client X or client Y build and prepare this estate plan for their heirs? I think if we can get down to the nitty gritty of what is the intention, what is the purpose, and tie that into a legacy meeting or have that be delivered from the client to their heirs, it adds intentionality behind the assets they're receiving. Even at just a base level, preparing your heirs also hopefully stops any sort of conflict or disagreement amongst the heirs. Now, of course, there's ways within the trust documents with a no contest clause where you can say, hey, if anybody contests this trust, they get $1 and they're out, to hopefully help alleviate that, because at least most of the clients that we've worked with, their number one most important factor is that the family remains together and the kids remain together, and there's nothing that wedges them apart, and especially not their estate.
If you design the trust right, and good estate attorneys will ask those important questions to make sure that the assets are distributed effectively and efficiently, like you said, but it also passes along those assets with your legacy in mind and what values you want to get across to the kids. And it's not so much about micromanaging and saying, hey, you can spend X on Y, or this is exactly how you have to use the money or these assets, but it helps guide those wishes.
Yes.
Gives you a little control from the grave. And if you have a preference on how it gets spent, you can do that too.
I think you're spot on there. If, the trust document and how particular you want to be with inside the trust can allow you to dictate and navigate through certain concerns of spending and those types of things. You may have three children, and two of them are well established, well on their feet, and then you may have one that may be the prodigal son in some regard. And you want to make sure and protect them from themselves to where you can have trust language specifically to where two of them are able to receive a lump sum, no problem, but maybe the third receives some sort of income payout over a specific period of time. The one thing that I would say is a trust allows you to be very strategic with your estate plan if you want to, if you want to dictate a little bit more after your passing.
When we see that and really preparing the heirs, whether that be telling them how the estate plan works, the actual technicalities behind the trust structures and how the assets will be passed down, we see that be very beneficial to the heirs, but also a piece of it is helping fund financial education around it, making sure that this wealth that you've built up over the years isn't squandered and is really used effectively. Are there some ways that you can help prepare the heirs, like potentially giving them graduated responsibility or smaller disbursements while you're still around to see the effect of what those assets might have? We're seeing a bigger movement where people are gifting away some assets really when the heirs have the most use for them, when they're young adults, rather than passing at 60, 70, 80 years old and leaving those assets to kids that are grown adults and really are set for it's really the last few years of their life.
That's a twofold answer right there, and you're spot on. We've seen a pretty large generational shift in how people are using their inheritances today. I would say it's been a big movement, paradigm shift. You go from the greatest generation ever, or they call them the greatest generation ever, and the baby boomers, who there were certain conversations that just were not going to be had with their kids and grandkids. It was very much when we pass away, you'll find out what we have, and that will be left to you as your inheritance. To where we've seen a lot more open discussion and what you alluded to with Gen X and millennials, where generationally they are giving or sharing their inheritance that's going to be left to their kids during their lifetimes. It is a paradigm shift. It's definitely something that was nowhere near as popular as it is today. But the fruits of it, and this kind of gets back to purpose and intention, is they're getting to enjoy their kids or grandkids, enjoy their inheritance, and giving it to them at a point in time in their life where they may really need it, where they're helping them either with a first house or they're helping them with a specific education expense. In my opinion, it's something that I'm much more in favor of, and I think is much more fruitful when it comes back down to, hey, are we living with purpose? Is my estate plan have purpose and intentionality? And of course, this is all within reason. It's like the very first and foremost is take care of you and your spouse and take care of yourselves first. But if we know there's going to be an inheritance, it's a really cool way to operate with it.
And there's a few other pieces that I did want to dive into here. If you don't know, both Shane and I grew up in Payson, fairly small town. Most of the businesses up there are small business, family run, mom and pop shops, things of that nature. We see a lot of financial missteps here around the legacy planning in the business space specifically. Most of the time, that business is their life's work. You made risks, you bet on this business, and so now it's grown into what you worked for and worked on for 40, 50 years, and it's more than just assets. What are some of the things that we see with those families and some of the things that they could plan for ahead of time and have these discussions that might be a little uncomfortable, but be very fruitful down the road and ultimately make sure that business is handled in an appropriate manner?
That's a little bit more of a complexity question, in my opinion. We could take a real big deep dive into business planning. And like, for example, within our office, we have a couple people who are certified exit planning advisors, right? So they actually help small businesses or families or business owners exit their businesses when the time is right. I only bring that up because now we're talking about it from a legacy perspective, but typically there's a couple of different options, right? If you're saying, hey, I'm getting ready to retire, with small businesses, typically it's either a family member or a close friend that is going to either they've been mentored and trained and they're going to take over the business. And so then there's some sort of business structure and business deal there. I would say a piece that we see missed all the time is either they don't have an appropriate buy sell on file, right? So God forbid something happened to the owner Is that individual that's being brought up to take over, are they prepared, or is there a plan in place if that person was to pass away for the business to continue? As sad as the case is, we've seen multiple times throughout our careers where businesses either shut their doors or can't successfully transition to the other person because there was no documentation in place, buy, sell, key person, life insurance, whatever it may be, to keep the business moving forward and to make sure that the legality of the transfer happens. So I would say at any point in time in your business, those are key considerations. Do you have somebody in your business that the business fully operates off of? That's a key person risk. There probably should be some sort of life insurance policy or some sort of insurance policy on them to make sure that if something ever happened, the business could still continue to operate. Most of the time, that is the owner. And then with that being said, a buy-sell agreement allows for the sake of, let's say, hey, we have this person, he's worked for me for 20 years and he's going to be the next, he's going to be taking it over. We're already preparing for him to buy it from me. But what happens if something happens suddenly? And again, that's another thing that you can insure away that type of risk. Last, just because I touched on it, I'll share a little bit, but from an exit planning perspective, let's say you're just preparing to sell. Typically, it's either you're selling to somebody internally, you're selling to a private equity firm, or some sort of national private equity is getting involved in your buyout. So it's either family, private equity, or another business coming in to buy. All three of those have their own complexities. What I would say is business sales can be structured very uniquely. I would say use a professional. And if you ever have any questions in that, you of course can definitely reach out to us. But when we get to business planning, exit planning, anything that evolves around business, and to Dylan's point, most of the time it's your biggest asset, you want to make sure you're protected for the what if.
And with that, Shane, one other piece that I'd throw in, some people, especially if it's a family-run business, have difficulty deciding what's fair when there's multiple heirs that it's going to. And we see a lot, there might be 4 kids, 2 of them work in the business and have an interest and want to take over, and the other 2 have no interest at all. That does create some conflict, but some issues there where planning can help equalize some of that to where each child gets what they want and the business keeps going. There's a statistic that says almost 80% of businesses don't have a plan, small businesses. So planning around that and not rushing the exit or succession plan can help you not undermine decades of building that business.
Spot on. And that's, again, those legacy plan meetings that I referenced earlier, those can be where some tough conversations need to be had as well, or how do we equalize this out? Because I'll give you an example. Got a ranching client who has multiple children. It's a legacy property. It's a massive property, but only one of the children has interest in actually ranching it and running it and managing the property. Does that one child get the entire legacy property? How do you make that fair within the family? And right there, in and of itself, a meeting could save the relationships of those other children if it's like, hey, you all have an opportunity here. Who wants it? And this is how we're going to make it fair, or at least make the decision. At least everyone's on the same page moving forward.
And you had mentioned key person insurance, and what if something happened tomorrow? What if a catastrophic event happens? Is there some sort of plan in place? We've got documents internally that we use all the time to help make sure that if something were to happen tomorrow, are you and your family ready? Do you know what to do? Do you know who to call? What are some pieces about that people would want to have prepared and ready just in case, whether you're 20 years old or whether you're 95 years old? What do you think some of those include?
Yeah. We are talking directly about, we have a legacy planning workbook that we'll use with clients to not only work with them, but also their kids. So something happens to you, your kids come, they're probably getting in your safe to be able to access your personal documents, to be able to find out where do we start. The legacy planning workbook, the idea behind it is that everything is in that one booklet. From doctors to liabilities to accounts, possibly account passwords, but you have a booklet that is really all encompassing of your financial data. So these are where these accounts are at. These are our financial professionals. Who do we contact first? That's a question that comes up all the time. Who do we need to reach out to first?
depending on your professional setup, almost always the advisor is your quarterback. Okay. The advisor is who communicates with the estate attorney or communicates with the CPA or communicates with, and they're usually the ones settling out with the assets anyways. Just based on the way the businesses are set up, usually the advisor has the ability and capacity for the service model to really handhold the heirs to walk them through. Because even with a great estate plan, settling out an estate has its complexities. So I would say lean on your professionals, but yes, the legacy plan workbook is where all of that can be stored. The way our workbook works, it actually has more than just key financial data. It's what was important to me. We have a client that actually one of my favorite end of life planning examples where it's not just about the money, it's about experience and values. And they have a specific amount of money set aside in cash that'll be left in their safe for the individual settling out their estate. And it has a letter with it that ultimately will allow the people setting out the estate take 3 trips together, 3 different places around the world, fully paid for by the money set aside to spread the ashes of that individual. So purpose, intentional, and it allows the surviving heirs to get 3 experiences together celebrating this individual. So again, I think that in my mind is much more like planning your estate than I got a trust document and I got my POAs in order.
That really dives into the celebration of life, funeral wishes, things like that, and really drives home the values and what do you want the money to leave? Money is just a tool for a lot of people and making sure that the right outcome is what happens with the funds. We see all the time once this packet or workbook gets completed, it gives you a lot of peace of mind knowing that if something were to happen, the people that would have to pick up the pieces know exactly where to go and they know how to do so. We see a lot of times settling out an estate can take anywhere from 1 to 3 years in some more complicated cases. It helps avoid that situation.
We start talking about complexities with some of the recent tax law changes. When I say recent, going back to 2020, 2017, and then the One Big Beautiful Bill Act from last year, you're seeing an estate tax threshold that's 30 million plus for a married couple. It's a significant number. With that being considered, when you look at your estate, if you're anywhere near that number, you could have some real tax problems real quick. So without effective planning, again, you immediately get into taxability that's in the 40 to 45% range if you go over that threshold number. That means out of every $1 million over that, you could possibly be losing 400 to 450,000 per million. So just know that when it comes to your estate, it is well worthwhile to be prepared and plan. As Dylan alluded to earlier, there's a lot of people that don't plan, and that's typically just an open invite to the IRS getting some free inheritance in the way that I look at it. And then on the other end of the spectrum, if you're just starting and preparing, there are lots of things that you can do. If you're just getting out, if you're like, hey, I can't afford a trust. Well, there's things you can do like making sure beneficiaries on all your documents, on all your financial accounts, banks, investments, making sure there's a Benny on your house. If you own a house, you can go to the county and put a beneficiary deed on your home. At least at that point in time, you're avoiding probate. A will does not avoid probate. I just want to clear that up. A will just allow the person to settle your estate out through probate. So you have to have a trust or you have to have beneficiaries and fund the trust. Let me be clear there. A lot of people get trust done and never put anything inside the trust, and that's a whole nother topic for another day. But I would say make sure we have a plan.
And probably the last piece that we'll go over today is, again, some of our clients and some of the things that we've seen over the years, they might not necessarily have beneficiaries that they want to leave these funds to. There might be some family conflict, or the kids might have grown and don't need the funds anymore. And most of these funds are going to be going to charity. Are there some creative ways or more efficient ways that we can give some of this away at the end of life or plan for it before end of life to keep the estate more intact and really make sure that legacy gets to where you want it?
Great question, Dylan. I would say, depending on your financial complexity and depending on tax situation, there's different charitable remainder trusts that could be used. There's lead trust and different ways on the charitable side, either for you to have income during your lifetime and it go to a charity after the fact and get a tax deduction, vice versa. The charity gets the income during your lifetime, but then it goes to your heirs. So there's lots of creative planning there. I would say if it's not a family conflict and you want your kids to have a giving trait in them, you want them to learn and be philanthropic through your estate, you could set up a donor advised fund to where and give them direction that they can give this over their lifetime, but every year they provide specific giving to specific charities of their interest and of their values. So there's lots of ways to be creative with charitable giving. Even while you're, again, this is a little bit off of the topic of legacy planning, but even while you're living, if you got RMDs, required minimum distributions that are coming out of your IRAs, give it out of your RMDs because it's considered a qualified charitable distribution, a QCD, which allows you to give, not pay tax on the money, and get to write it off, and the charity doesn't pay tax on it. So there's a lot of value if you have charitable intentions. I would just say talk to your professional and even take a meeting to talk about charitable giving and philanthropic giving.
With that, the one question that we'd want to leave you guys with is, what story will this money tell when you're no longer here to explain it? If you think about that and make sure that you have those points listed out to where the money financially and from a value perspective leaves behind the legacy you want, we feel that we did our job in helping guide you there. Yeah, but thanks for joining another episode of the Wealth Alchemist, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.